What's up, guys? It's John Dominique, the Soul Proponent. Today I want to talk a little bit about my own experience of this internal critic that we all carry around inside ourselves that no one seems to want to talk about, that very few people have any insight into as to how it is a major contributor, the number one obstacle to spiritual awakening. The internal critic is something that we've carried around ourselves all our lives. We've internalized this. It's like a character, an identity, like a personality, the ego personality, the super ego. It's like an accumulation of all the authority figures that we've experienced in our lives, we've come into contact with, and the aggregate force of this authority figure is what I call the inner critic. It builds as we live our lives. We get more experiences of having faced criticism from the people around us, and then we internalize and absorb this tendency to criticize ourselves. We don't think it's a big deal a lot of times. It's very subtle. It's in the background. We think it's normal. This is the way things are always going to be. We somehow give this inner critic the right to determine our value. And that's where we go wrong. And in the Garden of Eden, the judgment, the downfall of mankind is judgment. It's because we don't know when to quit. We keep judging, and that inner critic that's what it's doing. It's judging us and trying to determine our value and our worth on an unconscious level. A lot of times we're not aware of it. But it's very important that we see this critic for what it is, to be aware of it all the time, because it's really tricky. It's like a snake. It'll slither away. It'll find ways to continue to judge us, to keep the status quo, to keep everything exactly the way it is. It doesn't want to be challenged. It doesn't want to be seen. It doesn't want any light to be shed on it. It wants to stay in the darkness. And there's very little compassion or very little space, very little places or environments in society that will allow us to work on this inner critic. So we have to take control for ourselves and take the space and take the necessary actions in order to be aware and to do the work of confronting this inner critic and seeing it for what it is, because it's all pervasive. And we're hardly ever aware of it. So we have to kind of stretch our consciousness a little bit to become aware, to become hyper aware, to become super aware of how it operates, what it's trying to do, and how it influences us and dominates our behavior. It governs us on an unconscious level. A lot of times we're not aware of it. This inner critic is always judging everything. Nothing's ever good enough, basically, for this inner critic. And if you look at your own experience in your own life, you can kind of see that nothing's ever good enough. That's the feeling we're always left with, because the criticism is always there. There's this idea, and if we look at it closely, we can see like we have all these ideas of how we want things to be. Right? All these ideas of how we want things to be. We're very invested in these ideas and trying to bring these ideas into actuality, to make them into reality. But if you look at it closely, automatically that's a division, it's a conflict, because right away there's a rejection of reality exactly as it is without lifting a finger. Automatically, we don't think this is a huge deal, but right then and there is where it's a steep slope. We're falling down. The judgment this is the downfall of mankind. We don't know when to quit judging. So as soon as we reject reality, as soon as we want something other than the way things are exactly as they are without lifting a finger, that's the downfall. And we need to see that. We need to understand it, and not just intellectually. This is not just, oh, I'm just going to see this in my mind and move on with my life. No, we need to experience how this brings us down, how this creates suffering. There's a rejection. We don't like the rejection, and then we end up rejecting the rejection. And that's how the inner critic works. It's really slick. It'll start rejecting the rejection once it sees this and becomes aware of this. That's why people don't want anything to do with it, because it seems to make things worse. But we need to see, okay, how does that rejection work? It causes conflict. There's division. This conflict and division spills out from the inside of ourselves all out into the world. We project it out onto the world. We don't like what's there. We want it to be different. We're suffering because we're rejecting. We don't have the capacity to accept on the level that we need to be able to accept. So we need to be just aware without the best thing to do here is to just be aware without doing anything, without wanting things to change. And this is a very, very difficult thing for us, because all our lives our survival depends on taking action, on doing something. And we have to learn the art of stillness, inner stillness. Now, this doesn't mean like, if you're getting robbed or something, you just sit there and let yourself be robbed if you can do something about it. I'm talking about on the inside of us, the internal. That's why this is the internal critic. That critic lives on the inside of us. It's always there, and we're always projecting. So what I'm saying is, this internal critic on the inside of us that we carry around inside it's always operating. We need to know this internal critic better than we know ourselves, basically, is what I'm saying. We need to know this enemy very, very, very well, like to know ourselves. And that's one of the things we're not taught this. This is not something you can go find in a book, or most people anywhere, any religion you go, any institution, no one knows anything about this because it's not common knowledge, but it needs to become common knowledge. So this inner critic, we need to see how we're attached to it, how we depend on it, how we're fixated on it. And this is not the truth that sets us free. The truth that sets us free. It doesn't make us more dependent on the need to hold on to this inner critic, to need to concretize this inner critic, to make it more strong, to make it even more of a nuisance, more of a problem, because that's what ends up happening a lot of times when we become aware of it. It becomes stronger. So we need to see that and just relax. Don't do anything. Just keep seeing it and keep watching it on and on and on, more and more and more, until we become the part that's watching this inner critic. And stretches our awareness, stretches our consciousness until we become bigger than it. So just to be aware is the first step. And that's a huge step, because that indicates there's something bigger than the awareness. Once we become aware and once we can see, we allow ourselves the opportunity to become bigger than that inner critic, something more to that inner critic. We think that's all there is to life, and we're narrowed, we feel like we're in a corner, we're limited, and it's suffering. So this is a way to slowly loosen our attachments to this inner critic, to the fixations of this identity of who we think we are. So my experience is basically what I'm talking about right now. This is how I kind of accidentally, I would say, became aware of this inner critic and became smart. Like, I wouldn't say smarter. Well, yeah, actually smarter than the inner critic. We have to outsmart it. We have to know all of its tricks, because we can't know God without knowing the enemy. This enemy is very slick. It's very tricky. It's conniving. It's very difficult to continue like this. Like, it just seems like most people will walk the path for just a little bit whenever it's convenient, and then when it becomes difficult, that's when they say, it's too hard. But that's when we need to actually put in more work. When it becomes difficult, that's when we need to increase our intensity of inner critic work and to see this inner critic for what it's for. You know, during my experience, when I had my spiritual awakening, I just kept reading this book. It was called Soul Without Shame by Byron Brown. I highly recommend if anybody's really wanting to really do this inner work, because this is like, without being able to defend against this inner critic, there's no way really for the spiritual awakening to occur, because this is the enemy that's actually preventing spiritual awakening from happening. And we won't be able to hold the states that we experience. If we do have a spiritual awakening, it might not last. So this is a surefire way, almost guaranteed way for us to experience spiritual awakening. And that's how I basically how I experienced my spiritual awakening, by first knowing this enemy, this inner critic. It's very, very pervasive, and it dominates us. We need to see why and how it operates every single area of our lives. It's a lifelong endeavor, but the rewards are definitely worth it. So we need to be aware of this inner critic and how pervasive and how important it is that we know it better than we know ourselves. John Dominique, the Soul Proponent.